Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to our continued coverage of the Génat Conan the Barbarian bande dessinée adaptations. So last time we went over their first album, Queen of the Black Coast, and today we have the follow-up, based on a personal favorite Conan tale of mine, Black Colossus. So some quick background. This is the fourth of Howard's Conan stories to be published by Weird Tales in the June 1933 issue, to be precise. And it was the first to receive the honor of being the cover story for the issue, courtesy of artist Margaret Brundage. So for this adaptation, the writing is being handled by Vincent Brugeas and the art by Ronan Toulhoat. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. He's doing the art and colors. So these two have worked together a lot on previous projects, like, Block 109, Chaos Team, and in particular there's two medieval series. One's called Ira Dei, and the other Le Roi des Ribauds. Le Roi des Ribauds, the King of the Ribbles, so to speak. So, looking at those two, you definitely get the idea that that is what contributed to them being asked to come in on this particular one, because it is very much in tone for Black Colossus. Frankly, you could take this story, take out all the Hyborian Age names, and rewrite it to take place in the Middle Ages, and it would still work perfectly fine. It would just be like somewhere in one of the Crusader kingdoms at some point during the probably Second or Third Crusade, something like that. But anyway, enough with all that. Let's get to this album, which I dare say is a damn fine addition to this series. For starters, if any of you had any reservations whatsoever with the first album's art style, you'll be very pleased to know that Ronan Toulhoat has done an excellent job on this one. Like, I have really nothing negative to say about any of the art in this book. In particular, I love how expressive all his characters are. There's just a slight exaggeration to their features for artistic reasons, but everything never goes too far into cartoon territory, if you know what I mean. You can see a lot of detail on them. You can see all the different lines in the face. The eyes in particular I find very expressive, which is really excellent, especially on certain characters like, Count Thespides, Conan himself, Princess Yasmina especially. Also Nathok, the veiled one, the Thugra Khotan, the main villain, he's got a nice little despicable smile to him. All excellently drawn. So another aspect of the artwork that really stands out is the use of color throughout the entire thing. You've got, some good examples here. The very first page, this very washed out, sun-bleached ruin here gives you the perfect atmosphere for the entire thing. You also have some excellent scenes here at night. Conan is around a campfire, and the dark blues and purples of the night sky and the night desert, combined with the bright orange and yellows from the campfire there, really give the mood of a slight point of light amid all the darkness that's surrounding them. Excellently done. You also have here, in contrast, you have Nathok just standing out in the dark, alone, compared to all his men around their campfires, Conan and the princes around theirs. Excellently done. And of course, the battle that takes place, that the whole climax of this story revolves around, it is incredibly well done. You have that same kind of sun that we saw in the first pages. Only in his case, it's contrasted by both the yellow of the sand that gradually gets more and more red as the battle takes place, to the point of, as it goes on, the panels just become blood red. When Prince Kutamun, one of the enemies that Conan faces, the main secondary leader of the invading army, faces off against Conan one-on-one, the whole place looks like the sky is bathing in blood. It is unbelievable. Only for everything to turn back to regular colors after the battle closes. That is just excellent visual storytelling. You also have, Khotan's main treasure chamber being practically lit by the gold it contains. Which is a nice touch right there, too. So, for artwork, this thing is incredibly well done. There's also some nice little touches. So just going back to the start, when we get to a description being read by as we'll see later, the demons of Thugra Khotan, who are describing the history of the city as a master thief named Shevatas explores the place, the history is also illustrated in these kind of work-in-progress style ink sketches, which really is not something I've seen a lot of. In fact, I can't think of any other comics I've seen this kind of method used to do these kinds of flashbacks, and it is really inventive. I really like it. There's also, let's see, another nice little touch. If you look at on page, what is it? Page 17, when Conan is describing the current situation in the kingdom for the princess, you see the map there is also the main map of the actual series, which is a nice little touch. I do like the fact they use the series map that's on each one of these albums and have it right there in the middle of the room. So there is one thing that is a little bit odd. This falls into a bit of the adaptation, but it's also the artwork here. We saw there, Thorgar Khotan is, one, depicted without a veil, which is a bit odd because his alias is Nathok the Veiled One, and there's a reason for that. It's because he goes around with a hidden face in the story. And there's also the reason for that is because the guy is over 3,000 years old, and he looks it. The guy is basically a walking mummy at this point of his existence. But however, in this version, if we skip back to that night scene here, you can see the guy looks, well, pretty well conserved, kind of handsome in a very unwholesome way. You can see he doesn't look too bad. He's constantly surrounded by strange fly-like demonic swarm, but, you know, beyond that, he's looking pretty well conserved for a 3,000-year-old. So that brings us into the adaptation itself at this point. Now, the text itself is very close to the original Conan story, so there's not really any problems with that, no deviations from the original tale. There is some slight changes. You have, for instance, after Shevatas bites the bullet and acts as the, you know, introductory fake out at the start of a horror movie. In this original story, it went straight on to a slight description of the situation in the kingdom, in Khoraja, and then switches over to Princess Yasmila's bedchambers, where she's being threatened or, you know, menaced by the astral form of Nathok the Veiled One. Just, you know, nice little scene. Except in this case, that scene is left in flashback later on when she relates around the campfire to her story to Conan, the bits of it that he wasn't aware of in any case. Instead, at this point, it switches over to Conan in a tavern with a couple of his mercenary buddies, describing their little situation, how they're kind of, you know, rotting in place over there, but, you know, enjoying themselves. Until then, he's then introduced to Yasmina, who brings him out to her castle and introduces him to her problems and recruits him to be the leader of her armies. So it doesn't cause any problems to the story. It does omit one part from the OG story that was what got the story its cover by Margaret Brundage, and that is Yasmina disrobing herself in order to supplicate to a statue of the god Mitra. That, you know, which was on the cover of the Weird Tales version. And I'm not sure, I think it does occur in some of the other adaptations. I'll have to recheck again. But it is not necessarily that important to the story, and I can understand why Howard would have put it in his version, because, let's face it, he knew his audience and he knew his editor. But in this case, there's still plenty of nudity to go around from the princess. Don't worry about that. I mean, the ending is still as metal as ever. I mean, Conan and Yasmina getting down on the altar she was about to be sacrificed, while the dead wizard is lying there with Conan's sword through his chest. I mean, that is worthy of a Ken Kelly Manowar album cover, let's face facts. And it is just as explicit as you would expect from French comics. There's also some interesting little things here. I do like the fact that if you look at the speech bubbles for Thorgar Khotan himself, they are normal speech bubbles. They're just, you know, regular white speech bubbles. If you look at his demons, though, it's that kind of strange buzzing flies look to the speech bubbles, white on black rather than black on white. So you do get the distinction that when he's in control of them, and you also get the distinction when he's disagreeing with them, such as, for instance, on this page here, where he's saying, then she'll be mine, and they're going ours. Because there's still a little bit of fracturing beginning between him and his main demonic allies, which results in the end after he fails to, you know, gets distracted by her and then loses his demons, which leaves him vulnerable to Conan. I will say this, though. I do like how these demons look in this story. Usually they're depicted, as if they were in the story, as a strange kind of evil-looking black camel that would eventually sprout wings and fly away, and a strange ape-like manservant that, you know, would drive his chariot. Here it's almost like corpses being animated by a swarm of biting insects, which is a nice way of depicting something truly unnatural and demonic. I do like that. One other thing that relates interestingly to those demons is that at the start of the story, they're the ones who are doing the narration during Shevatas's ill-fated attempt to steal the treasures of Kuchemes. At the end, when Conan is chasing after Thugger Khotan after he kidnaps the princess, it's not them doing it. It's the regular kind of omniscient narrator kind of voice in the text boxes. And the descriptions are completely different. If we look at the first ones, the demons describe the civilization that Thugger Khotan was in charge of in wonderful terms. Shevatas walks on the traces of an ancient and prodigious civilization, rich in knowledge and in goods, a perfect society governed by the greatest wise sages of the known world. That was, looked on with envy and hatred by the barbarians that surrounded it. Whereas when the actual omniscient narrator talks about the place, well, they're talking about a civilization that under a outer layer of progress and scientific wonders practiced human sacrifices in the darkest of sorceries, ancient and corrupt civilization. So you definitely get that contrast that's only possible by really doing those kinds of effects with the different ways of doing the text, which is, a nice touch, I find. Beyond that, there's also like one moment at the start of the battle where Conan can't see, no one can see the enemy approaching because Thugger Khotan has raised this unnatural mist covering the army as it approaches, only for Conan to put his ear to the ground and say, "Oh shit, they're coming, battle formations," which is a nice little moment. That's one's missing in this one. Beyond that, in terms of the adaptation itself, there's not that much to say, ultimately, in terms of, changes or odd decisions. It's very much a straightforward adaptation of the text, and it is done very well. There's nothing in particular wrong with it. I can't think of any real criticisms to make of it. So really, this one is a very straightforward review because, frankly, there's nothing wrong with this thing. It is ultimately, if you had any doubts whatsoever of getting into this series, of going over this, and I can understand there being some doubts for many English speakers because Ablaze Comics has not released yet a English version of this one, so if you want to read it, you're going to be stuck with the French one unless you find a fan translation. However, I highly recommend picking up Black Colossus, Le Colosse Noir by Génat Éditions. It is excellent. Quite frankly, if you pick up any of these books, this is one of the ones to pick up. I cannot think of a single bad thing to say about it. It is, across the board, an excellent adaptation and an excellent bande dessinée, period. Of course, you have at the end, just like the previous album, the background for the story itself, along with pin-up art from various artists. All very well done as well. Buy this book. I don't care what you got to do. Go out there, find this book, buy it. Because goddamn, it is excellent. So eventually Ablaze Comics is going to come up with a translation for it. That's pretty much a given. But even then, hardcover, nicely but excellent binding. This whole book is just great. I'm just really happy to have it, frankly. So in any case, that has been Black Colossus by Robert E. Howard with adaptation by Vincent Brugeas and Ronan Toulhoat on the pens for the art. It is great. Next time we'll be covering Beyond the Black River, and that's another pretty good one. Frankly, this is not just one of my favorite stories. This is just an excellent example of how you do a proper Conan adaptation. It keeps the tone, it keeps the style, it keeps the original text it sticks to the original text without being absolutely slavishly devoted to it, which is important when you're doing an original adaptation. And yet, it very much does exactly what you want from a Conan adaptation in comic form. That's really the best thing I can say about it. It does exactly what you want for it. So, I'm going to thank you all for watching. Go buy this book, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.